1986 Firearm Owners Protection Act and Hughes Amendment, FOPA. The passage of the Firearm Owners Protection Act in 1986 was both a significant victory and a profound disappointment for gun owners. While FOPA corrected many abuses that had been occurring under the 1968 Gun Control Act, GCA, it also included the highly controversial Hughes Amendment, which severely restricted the ownership of machine guns. The fight for FOPA. The Firearm Owners Protection Act was a response to the widespread abuse of gun owners and dealers by federal agents, particularly the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF. Numerous accounts of harassment, entrapment, and unlawful seizures were presented to Congress, exposing a pattern of targeting innocent gun owners and dealers for technical violations of the GCA. These abuses led to the creation of FOPA, which sought to limit the overreach of federal authorities and protect the rights of law-abiding citizens. Some examples of ATF abuses that motivated the passage of FOPA include 115 felony charges for technical errors. A dealer was charged with 115 felonies because cities were listed on transfer forms instead of counties. This was one of many examples where minor technical errors were treated as serious crimes. Entrapment and seizure. In one case, licensed dealer David Moorhead reported a suspicious transaction to the ATF, only to be charged with illegal possession of a machine gun because the agents decided the firearm in question could be classified as such. His entire inventory was seized, and his business was destroyed, despite the case being dismissed in court. Seizure of firearms collections. Collectors often had their entire collections seized by the ATF. Even when found not guilty in court, the ATF would refuse to return the firearms, claiming civil asset forfeiture allowed them to keep the property without proving criminal activity beyond a reasonable doubt. FOPA sought to correct these abuses by implementing several reforms. Interstate sales. FOPA allowed licensed dealers to sell long arms, rifles, and shotguns to out-of-state residents, though handguns remained restricted to in-state sales. Prohibited persons. The bill clarified the definition of prohibited persons, allowing individuals who had their rights restored, such as pardoned felons, to possess firearms without fear of prosecution. Gun shows. FOPA allowed licensed dealers to sell firearms at gun shows, expanding legal avenues for firearm transactions. These reforms were aimed at protecting law-abiding gun owners and dealers from the excessive and often arbitrary enforcement of the GCA by federal agents. The Hughes Amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I made the motion to rise so that I could get additional time from the Rules Committee to finish debate on a number of amendments that were noticed, have not been reached, and will not be heard. And that's unfortunate. It's an important matter. My unanimous consent request is that I have 5 minutes. My unanimous request.
The gentleman will state his
My unanimous consent request is that I have 5 minutes to explain this vote on machine gun bans.
Is there any
Reserving the
objection?
right to object. Reserving the right to object. Would the gentleman explain why he wants that 5 minutes to us?
So that we can explain what's pending before the House.
Is there any objection?
And what's pending before the House is a ban on machine guns.
Our side 5 minutes to
Objection
respond.
is heard. The question is on the adoption of the Hughes Amendment to the Volcker substitute. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Let it go. Let it go.
Mr. Chairman.
Let it go. You got it.
The question before.
However, the victory of FOPA was severely marred by the last-minute addition of the Hughes Amendment. Named after Representative William J. Hughes of New Jersey, this amendment banned the sale of new machine guns to civilians. Only fully automatic firearms manufactured and registered before May 19, 1986, could legally be owned by civilians. This effectively froze the civilian market for machine guns, making them increasingly rare and prohibitively expensive as time passed. The Hughes Amendment is widely regarded as unconstitutional by many gun rights advocates. Unlike other gun control laws that restrict access, but do not outright prohibit ownership. The Hughes Amendment created a total ban on the manufacture and sale of new machine guns to civilians. This stands in stark contrast to the Second Amendment's guarantee of the right to bear arms, particularly when machine guns had previously been legal to own under the National Firearms Act, NFA, as long as proper registration and tax stamps were obtained. The amendment was added to FOPA under dubious circumstances. Footage from the 1986 congressional session shows that the amendment was added without proper debate and may not have even passed the required vote count. Despite this, it was included in the final version of FOPA that was signed into law. The NRA, which had been instrumental in advocating for FOPA, accepted the Hughes Amendment as part of a compromise. The organization believed that the overall benefits of FOPA outweighed the negative impact of the Hughes Amendment. However, this decision has been criticized by many gun owners who feel that the NRA should have fought harder to oppose the amendment. Moreover, since the passage of FOPA, the NRA has not made significant efforts to repeal the Hughes Amendment, leading to frustration among gun rights advocates. The Hughes Amendment has also created a highly distorted market for machine guns. Pre-1986 machine guns, which are legal to own, have become exceedingly expensive, often costing tens of thousands of dollars. In contrast, new machine guns made for law enforcement and military use can be purchased for a fraction of that price, but they are not available to the general public. The consequences of FOPA and the Hughes Amendment. While FOPA corrected many abuses of the GCA, the Hughes Amendment represents a significant infringement on the Second Amendment. It created a permanent and arbitrary barrier to owning a specific class of firearms that had previously been legal, and it did so under questionable legislative procedures. The Firearm Owners Protection Act is a reminder of the delicate balance between preserving gun rights and negotiating with a government that often seeks to curtail them. The compromises made in 1986 continue to have a profound impact on gun owners today, particularly those interested in owning machine guns. The ongoing debate over the Hughes Amendment serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising on constitutional rights in the face of government overreach. A word on machine guns. As of 2024, a groundbreaking ruling by federal Judge John Brooms dismissed a charge related to machine guns, finding that they constitute bearable arms under the original meaning of the Second Amendment. He stated that the burden lies on the government to demonstrate that such regulation aligns with historical tradition. This ruling is monumental, largely due to the legal precedent set by the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision, which reshaped how courts evaluate Second Amendment cases. You might wonder why it has taken this long to challenge restrictions on machine guns. The answer largely ties back to the Hughes Amendment. The Hughes Amendment, passed in 1986, effectively banned the civilian registration of new machine guns, creating an artificially limited supply of pre-1986 machine guns that are still legal for civilians to own. For example, in 1985, a drop-in autosear, a small device that converts an AR-15 to fully automatic, could be purchased for as little as $75 to $100. Today, that same product can fetch up to $50,000 at auction, representing an annual return of roughly 19%. This inflated value exists solely because of the Hughes Amendment's restrictions. Many gun owners who invested in these pre-1986 machine guns have little interest in seeing the Hughes Amendment repealed, as it has turned their firearms into valuable collectibles. Some of these gun owners are also members of the NRA, which has notably refrained from directly challenging the Hughes Amendment. So the next time you come across someone showing off their extensive collection of pre-1986 transferable machine guns, remember that their stance on the Hughes Amendment might differ greatly from yours. While a push to deregulate suppressors and short-barreled rifles, SBRs, is feasible, fully automatic weapons represent a much steeper challenge. 1988 Undetectable Firearms Act, UFA. The Undetectable Firearms Act, UFA, of 1988. This is often overlooked in discussions of gun control history, but it highlights the political landscape of gun legislation during the late 1980s. Signed into law by President Ronald Reagan, the UFA was supported by both gun control advocates and some pro-gun groups, including the NRA. The law was driven by fears, largely unfounded, that advancements in firearm technology, particularly the emergence of polymer frame guns like the Glock, could allow for the creation of firearms that could pass through metal detectors undetected. Background of the Act. At the time, there was significant public concern about the supposed threat posed by plastic guns, like the Glock 17, which had gained widespread popularity for its lightweight polymer frame. Media reports sensationalized the idea that such guns could bypass airport security and other metal detectors, sparking fears of undetectable firearms falling into the wrong hands. These concerns were largely misplaced. While the Glock's frame was made of polymer, critical components such as the barrel, slide, and firing mechanisms were still metal and would trigger metal detectors. Despite the exaggerated fears, Congress acted on the public outcry, and the Undetectable Firearms Act was born. The law made it illegal to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive any firearm that could not be detected by walk-through metal detectors or did not contain enough metal to trigger security screening devices. NRA and industry support. The UFA is a key example of how the NRA and some industry stakeholders supported certain gun control measures when they aligned with broader interests. The NRA backed the UFA, which allowed them to appear cooperative on gun safety while maintaining influence in the legislative process. Additionally, established U.S. gun manufacturers were not threatened by the UFA, as their firearms already complied with metal detector standards. Supporting the UFA also served as a way for the NRA and domestic gun manufacturers to slow the rise of Glock, a foreign competitor that was gaining traction in the U.S. market. This move parallels earlier efforts by American gun manufacturers to lobby for restrictions on imported firearms in the 1960s. Both actions were motivated by the desire to protect domestic industries from foreign competition under the guise of public safety concerns. Implications for the future. Although undetectable firearms remain largely a novelty, the UFA remains relevant due to the emergence of 3D printed firearms. The rise of additive manufacturing technologies, or 3D printing, has made it possible for individuals to create firearms at home, raising new concerns about the potential for undetectable plastic guns. However, as the NRA pointed out in a recent statement, 3D printed firearms generally still require metal components such as the slide, barrel, and firing pins, which would trigger metal detectors. Thus, the scenario of truly undetectable firearms remains largely hypothetical. NRA statement on the UFA. Many anti-gun politicians and members of the media have wrongly claimed that 3D printing technology will allow for the production and widespread proliferation of undetectable plastic firearms. Regardless of what a person may be able to publish on the internet, undetectable plastic guns have been illegal for 30 years. Federal law passed in 1988, crafted with the NRA's support, makes it unlawful to manufacture, import, sell, ship, deliver, possess, transfer, or receive an undetectable firearm. The ongoing debate over 3D printed firearms echoes the fears that led to the passage of the UFA in 1988. As of now, the technology has not advanced to the point where fully undetectable firearms are a realistic concern. Most 3D printed firearms still require metal components, and efforts to create entirely plastic guns have so far resulted in impractical, unreliable designs. Conclusion. The Undetectable Firearms Act serves as an example of how gun control legislation can sometimes be driven more by fear and misinformation than by actual threats. The act also demonstrates how even pro-gun organizations and politicians can support gun control measures when they align with broader strategic interests, such as protecting domestic industries or appearing cooperative in the legislative process. While the UFA remains on the books, its practical impact has been limited, and the fears that drove its passage have not materialized to the extent initially imagined. However, as 3D printing technology evolves, the UFA may once again become a focal point in the ongoing debate over gun control and firearms technology. 1989 Firearm Import Ban and the 1993 Assault Weapon Ban, AWB.
We cannot be secure in our property if, without our consent, other may take it away.
John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution. The Assault Weapon Ban, AWB of 1994, has become one of the most discussed and sought-after policies by advocates of stricter gun control, often resurfacing whenever a mass shooting occurs. Many people wrongly believe the AWB was solely a creation of the Clinton administration, but its roots stretch back to the precedent set by George H.W. Bush in 1989. 1989 Firearm Import Ban. The story begins in 1989 when 5 children were killed in a school shooting in Stockton, California. The shooter used an AK-47, which prompted President George H.W. Bush to take executive action. In March of that year, Bush banned the import of certain semi-automatic rifles, and by July, the ban was made permanent. This import ban laid the groundwork for what would later become the Federal Assault Weapon Ban of 1994. At its core, the import ban was more of a political gesture than a meaningful step toward reducing crime. The weapons Bush banned could still be manufactured domestically, which rendered the ban largely ineffective as a public safety measure. Instead, it acted as a protectionist policy for U.S. gun manufacturers, shielding them from competition with foreign-made firearms. 1993 Assault Weapon Ban. By the time the 1993 AWB was being crafted, the groundwork had already been laid by Bush's import ban. The AWB was introduced by Senator Dianne Feinstein, with support from former presidents Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan, and was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. Officially named the Public Safety and Recreational Firearms Use Protection Act, the AWB sought to restrict the sale of specific types of firearms by creating the term assault weapon to demonize them. The classification was based not on the functionality of the weapons, but on their cosmetic features, which were arbitrarily deemed dangerous. The term assault weapon itself is a piece of propaganda, inspired by the German term Sturmgewehr, meaning storm rifle or assault rifle. It has since become a political tool to stoke fear and support for more gun restrictions. However, even government agencies like the Air Force and the Department of Homeland Security prefer terms like air crew self-defense weapons or personal defense weapons for the same firearms that are branded as assault weapons in the political realm. Key elements of the AWB. The 1994 AWB restricted a broad range of semi-automatic firearms based on a set of features rather than their actual functionality. The key elements of the ban included folding or telescoping stock, targeted for making firearms more concealable. In reality, these stocks are primarily for ease of storage and adjusting the gun's fit for different users or shooting positions. Pistol grip, demonized as making the gun more dangerous, though in practical terms, it simply improves ergonomics and control. Bayonet mount. A holdover from another era, this was irrelevant in modern civilian firearm use. Flash suppressor or threaded barrel. Misunderstood as making guns harder to trace in a firefight, when in fact they reduce the flash that can temporarily blind the shooter in low-light conditions. Grenade launcher. Although grenade launchers are already heavily regulated under the NFA, the AWB restricted the mount itself, not the launchers. Magazines restricted magazine capacity to 10 rounds or fewer based on the belief that this would limit a shooter's ability to inflict mass casualties, despite evidence showing that magazine changes take mere seconds. The arbitrary nature of these restrictions became clear in subsequent studies, which found no discernible effect on gun violence as a result of the ban. The AWB banned certain features of firearms that do not make them inherently more dangerous, and as a result, its effectiveness was limited. The AWB's impact. While the AWB expired in 2004, variants of the law continue to exist at the state level in places like California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. Several studies conducted during and after the AWB's enactment revealed its ineffectiveness in reducing gun violence. National Research Council, 2005. A recent evaluation of the short-term effects of the 1994 federal assault weapons ban did not reveal any clear impacts on gun violence outcomes. National Institute of Justice, 2004. There has been no discernible reduction in the lethality and injuriousness of gun violence, based on indicators like the percentage of gun crimes resulting in death or the share of gunfire incidents resulting in injury. Rand Corporation found no conclusive evidence that assault weapon bans reduced overall homicides, firearm homicides, or mass shootings. Bloomberg School of Public Health could not find an independent association between assault weapon bans and the incidence of fatal mass shootings. Moreover, firearm-related homicides had already begun to decline before the AWB was implemented in 1994, making it difficult to attribute any changes directly to the ban. Conclusion: the 1989 import ban and the 1993 assault weapon ban represent attempts by lawmakers to address gun violence through legislation targeting specific types of firearms. However, these laws have largely proven ineffective at reducing crime. Instead, they created a new class of politically charged terminology and further divided the gun control debate. The AWB's reliance on cosmetic features to define assault weapons reveals a misunderstanding of firearms and their use. Furthermore, the precedent set by George H.W. Bush's import ban shows how gun control measures often act as protectionist policies that benefit certain industries rather than meaningfully addressing public safety concerns. As gun control advocates continue to push for a new assault weapon ban, it is crucial to recognize the lessons from the past and understand that restricting firearms based on their appearance rather than their function is unlikely to achieve the desired outcomes. The Brady Bill. Here's the story of a man named Brady. So what do the National Firearms Act, NFA, the Federal Firearms Act, FFA, the Gun Control Act, GCA, and Jodie Foster have in common? The Brady Bill. ASDM, anti-Second Amendment media, proponents often claim that gun owners support the legislation, but this narrative deserves closer examination. Background: the assassination attempt. In 1981, John Hinckley Jr. infamously attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan in a misguided attempt to impress actress Jodie Foster. The assassination attempt left 3 individuals wounded: D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty, White House press secretary James Brady, and President Reagan himself. Brady was shot just above the eye, which left him permanently disabled, confined to a wheelchair, and suffering from speech issues for the rest of his life. The incident sparked a major debate over gun control. Delahanty later attempted to sue Rome RG, the manufacturer of the inexpensive .22 caliber pistol used in the assassination attempt, arguing that small, cheap guns served no purpose other than crime. This argument laid the groundwork for future efforts to impose excessive taxes on firearms and advocate for minimum prices, targeting low-cost firearms. James and Sarah Brady's crusade for gun control. James Brady and his wife Sarah became prominent advocates for gun control, pushing for waiting periods and background checks as measures they believed could have prevented Hinckley from carrying out the attack. They argued that the would-be assassin's psychiatric history should have been flagged during a background check, though it's more likely such measures would have simply delayed Hinckley's attack rather than prevented it altogether. The first Brady Bill, which called for a 5-day waiting period and the creation of the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NRICS, was signed into law by President Bill Clinton in 1993 with the endorsement of former President Ronald Reagan. This legislation marked a significant milestone in federal gun control efforts. Paperwork and background checks. Gun control through background checks and paperwork often creates more problems for law-abiding citizens than it solves for stopping criminals. Similar to welfare programs bogged down in paperwork that hurt those who genuinely need assistance while enabling those who know how to manipulate the system, gun control measures like the Brady Bill disproportionately affect honest citizens who are trying to navigate the bureaucratic hurdles to obtain a firearm for self-defense. Meanwhile, career criminals who operate outside legal channels are often unaffected. The idea that waiting periods or background checks would prevent determined criminals from obtaining firearms is akin to pushing a crosswalk button in New York City. Over 2,500 of the 3,250 crosswalk buttons in NYC haven't worked since the 1980s, yet people continue to press them, believing they are making a difference. Gun control measures often create the illusion of action without addressing the root causes of violence. Law enforcement perspective. Numerous law enforcement officials have pointed out that criminals do not obtain guns through legal channels. For example, Willis Ross of the Florida Police Chiefs Association stated, "I think any working policeman will tell you that the crooks already have guns. If a criminal fills out an application and sends his application, he's the biggest, dumbest crook I've ever seen." Kansas City's chief of police observed that criminals acquire guns by theft, by trade, or by using legal surrogate buyers. Drug dealers do not purchase their guns over the counter. Duke University's Philip Cook remarked, "Criminals do not buy guns through normal channels, but instead find ways of circumventing the screening system entirely." Studies and evidence. A number of studies have examined the effects of waiting periods and background checks on violence, with mixed results. A Georgetown University and Duke University study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, 2000, found that while the Brady Bill's waiting period was associated with a reduction in firearm suicides for individuals 55 and older, it had no significant impact on homicide rates or overall suicide rates. The Firearm Injury Center at the Medical College of Wisconsin reported a sharp increase in the risk of suicide within 1 week of a gun purchase in Wisconsin. A CDC review of studies on waiting periods revealed inconclusive results, with some studies indicating a decrease in violence, while others showed an increase. Researchers from the University of Cincinnati and Arizona State University found no statistical effects from waiting periods on gun crimes. Rand Corporation research found inconclusive evidence for the impact of waiting periods on mass shootings, violent crime, or intimate partner homicide. Constitutionality of the Brady Bill. The Supreme Court ruled in 1997 that parts of the original Brady Bill were unconstitutional. In Prince v. United States, the court held that the federal government could not compel states to enforce federal regulatory programs, including the background check provisions of the Brady Bill. Justice Scalia's opinion stated,
"The federal government may neither issue directives requiring the states to address particular problems, nor command the states' officers, or those of their political subdivisions, to administer or enforce a federal regulatory program."
Conclusion. While the Brady Bill represents a major milestone in the history of federal gun control, it has also shown the limitations of such measures. The intent behind the legislation was to prevent dangerous individuals from obtaining firearms, but the evidence suggests that waiting periods and background checks have had little impact on reducing crime. Criminals continue to find ways to circumvent legal restrictions, while law-abiding citizens bear the burden of the increased bureaucracy and delays in obtaining firearms for self-defense. The debate over the Brady Bill reflects the larger struggle between the desire for public safety and the constitutional rights of citizens. It serves as a reminder that gun control measures often create a false sense of security while failing to address the deeper issues that lead to violence. Background checks. When the Federal Firearms Act, FFA, was signed into law in 1938, it set the stage for eventual background checks. As the government began regulating firearms, the trajectory toward deeper scrutiny of gun ownership was inevitable. While some gun owners may still hold out hope for the repeal of measures like the National Firearms Act, NFA, or for the removal of suppressors and short-barrel firearms from its purview, there is little optimism that background checks and the provisions of the Brady Bill will ever be undone. Once the government gains control, relinquishing that power is rare. Background checks, along with the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, were implemented as part of the Brady Bill in 1998. This level of gun control has been accepted by many gun owners, with some even referring to it as common sense. It seems that, amidst the noise and fear-mongering about firearms, many gun owners who are trying to appease the ASDM, anti-Second Amendment media, crowd have bought into the idea that background checks are a necessary evil. However, not everything is as it seems. Background checks extend far beyond what they appear to be on the surface and encompass multiple areas of gun control that many supporters may not fully consider. Constitutional concerns. Background checks pose significant constitutional issues, as Judge Andrew Napolitano has pointed out.
Background checks violate the First Amendment because they compel people to speak, providing information about themselves. They could also be seen as a violation of the right against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment, because you are forced to provide evidence against yourself in order to acquire a gun. And they violate the 10th Amendment because the requirement to provide this information is not an explicitly stated power of the federal government in the U.S. Constitution.
The ineffectiveness of background checks. Despite their prevalence, background checks are woefully ineffective at achieving their intended purpose. Consider this data from 2010. Over 6 million background checks were conducted that year. Out of those millions of checks, only 13 resulted in actual convictions, a paltry 0.00002%. Even if one considers the number of people denied firearm purchases due to background checks, the results are still underwhelming. In 2010, 72,659 denials were issued, amounting to only 1.2% of the total checks. However, a staggering 95% of those denials were later determined to be false positives, reducing the actual number of legitimate denials to a mere 0.06%. Moreover, even this tiny fraction of denials does not guarantee that the individual was justifiably prevented from obtaining a firearm. Criminals determined to commit crimes are unlikely to be deterred by a simple denial at the point of sale. The costs and misuse of background checks. Background checks also come with a hefty price tag. The NIC system costs an average of $60 million annually, and efforts like the Fix NICS Improvement Act added another $1.3 billion in costs. In 2008, President George W. Bush signed a bill authorizing $1 billion for improved record-keeping at the state level, but much of this money was never spent. Despite these massive investments, background checks remain a flawed system that cannot deliver the promised results. Moreover, background checks are vulnerable to misuse. For example, starting as early as 1998, the Veterans Administration, VA, began reporting veterans experiencing financial difficulties to NICS as mentally incompetent. This resulted in thousands of veterans being added to secret lists simply because they were struggling with their finances. Social Security recipients also found themselves at risk of being flagged. These practices demonstrate how background checks can be used to deny rights without due process, a dangerous precedent for all citizens. The limits of background checks. Even with a comprehensive background check system in place, it will never work in the sense that it will stop crime. Criminals find ways around the system, just as they do with drug laws and other prohibitions. Gun theft is another issue that background checks cannot address. With 390 million firearms in private hands and countless instances of armory robberies, the problem of firearm theft will persist. Even the ATF itself has experienced firearm theft by its own employees. The only real effect of background checks and gun control laws is to disarm those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes, leaving law-abiding citizens defenseless. As Thomas Jefferson once said,
"Laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed one."
A Pandora's box of problems. In summary, background checks create more problems than they solve. They impose unnecessary costs on taxpayers, are easily misused by government agencies, and infringe on constitutional rights without effectively stopping criminals. Moreover, they set the stage for even more intrusive measures, such as universal background checks and the regulation of private sales. Despite being touted as common sense measures, background checks do little to prevent crime and may only serve to push criminal activity into other areas, such as bombings or knife attacks, as seen in places like London. Background checks are a Pandora's box that opens the door to greater government intrusion and surveillance without providing any real solution to the problems of crime and violence. Ongoing backdoor gun control. In recent years, several companies have actively restricted the gun industry in what some might describe as backdoor gun control. Companies like Shopify, Salesforce, PayPal, Amazon, eBay, Square, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Google have all taken actions that have hindered the ability of firearm-related businesses to operate freely. The argument that these companies are private entities and have the right to decide how they run their platforms is only partially accurate. For some, like Shopify, the situation is more complicated. Shopify, for instance, initially told firearm sellers that they could host their e-commerce websites on the platform, leading many to invest heavily in customizing their sites. However, Shopify later changed its policies, causing significant financial losses for these businesses. Similarly, social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube were once open to gun-related content when they were trying to grow their free speech platforms. However, once these companies became more established, they began limiting, blocking, banning, and demonetizing gun-related content. While these platforms may claim that their actions are solely business decisions, their relationship with governments complicates that narrative. One notable example is the leaked conversation between Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and German Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2015. During the exchange, Merkel asked Zuckerberg what Facebook was doing to curtail anti-immigrant posts, to which Zuckerberg responded, "We need to do some work on that." This interaction raises questions about the extent to which government pressure influences these companies' policies. This leads us to a more direct example of government involvement: Operation Choke Point. While the Obama administration's gun-running scandal, Fast and Furious, received significant attention, Operation Choke Point is lesser known, even though its implications are just as far-reaching. Operation Choke Point was a federal government initiative that targeted lawful businesses, including firearm dealers, by pressuring banks to sever ties with them. This illegal campaign was carried out at the highest levels of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, and was implemented with the full force of the federal government. Government officials threatened bank employees with criminal prosecution if they didn't comply, making it difficult for businesses in industries like firearm sales to access basic banking services. Though Operation Choke Point has officially ended, its effects are still felt. Companies like Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and Bank of America have enacted policies that restrict their dealings with firearm-related businesses. The question remains, are these companies acting on their own, or is there external pressure at play? While some argue that these decisions are driven by woke capitalism and the desire to appeal to social justice warriors, SJWs, others suspect there may be more behind these moves than meets the eye. Summary: History of gun control up to today. This section has explored various aspects of gun control at the federal level, from the National Firearms Act of 1934 to Operation Choke Point. While there are many important state-level gun control measures throughout American history, those details have been omitted here for brevity. For those interested in the state-level history of gun control, Sam Jacobs has done an excellent rundown of these laws at the Libertarian Institute in his post, State Gun Control in America. You can find his detailed exploration of the topic by searching the Libertarian Institute or following the link in the reference.